Warmly welcoming you back to this program, ThinkTech Hawaii, and this show, Humane Architecture. This happening to be our 353rd show, and on YouTube, you're somewhere in the 21,400 viewership. If you go back to the website and have watched on the ThinkTech website, have been way more viewers. So we're back here, the three of us, Jay Fidell and Pedro Capriata, and we continue to talk as you just gave us the whatever, Jay, and said, are you going to stay on Barcelona forever? And I said, because it is so good. But also traditionally, you put it into the context, gentlemen, why we are so into it and in fact jealous, and because we're not anywhere close. But thanks to your warning sign, Pedro, that we don't use up all the showtime talking about that and keep going on Barcelona as well, I leave it to one slide, this one here, but I think we should dive in and indulge a little bit. So I just got back from my spring break in Germany to get an exchange going finally to take our students to the Technical University of Munich. So whenever I come back, I see things even clearer. To the left is on my street, Koa Avenue, where the previous Innocent King's Village by Hammeter at the beginning, his little thing, the two show quotes up there. YouTube always puts little show quotes pictures, so you find the two shows that, in fact, Jay, you and I have been doing. So this thing is growing up, and I want to throw out for discussion here, this thing is doing, and this is just representative for all the other ones. It's not just this, it's these, right? That does everything wrong on all levels. So first of all, typologically, this is a timeshare tower. We don't need timeshare towers anymore. We actually need shared time of dwelling with everyone. So we don't need a capital concentration leaning to social isolation typology anymore. We need something that is an open system versus a closed system here. Orientation is wrong and fenestration is wrong. This is blocking the trade winds. It's orientated against it. And then there is this glass going on. And so it's just all wrong. There's the first floors are the parking plinth. There's going to be some screens on there. And we're saying you could actually then, quick fix, you move all the traffic out of Waikiki, you can have people move in to where the cars were, and the people are better protected because there is some shading screen on. All these things we've been talking about. So you can also look at that picture in reverse and saying, this is where, people have been listening to us because this building gets unmoo-mooed, so it doesn't get moo-mooed, right? Which of course will happen now. Every day there's another floor glazed, but you can say you can reverse that. And gentlemen, you can reverse everything, right? You can even reverse politics, right? And Jay, I'm really like, a year ago, you had to crucify the previous program with 30 plus shows and boiled it down to what you thought the essentials. But even in the essentials, people who had said they never want to talk about politics. One is our buddy DeSoto Brown. You got him out last week, and in his show, How Did We Get Here, making it, where are we? And where the hell are we going with that, right? So everything, I don't think we should, we can't afford to be an exception, gentlemen, to that. We can't afford to do, business as usual, because there is no usual anymore. So we have to, when you look at these things, this is the embodiment. Architecture has always been and will always be the embodiment of societal values. And this is the embodiment of what's going wrong. And needless to say, at the very top, we were looking at the Apprentice, movie, and this is it, right? So this is a Trumpian manifestation of capital concentration, and we have to undo these. And on the right, you see this is your fellow Barcelonian, Sergi's former T3 bus. They have always been made in my hometown of Hanover, but now VW is in trouble. And now, sadly, because of the geopolitical situation, we're now making soon more tanks to protect ourselves and go out into war than we make cars. I mean, this is something really serious, right, and problematic. And so, but with this car, right, that has the pop-up Westphalia roof, you can actually be biokinetic, right? You can actually adjust to the environment. And also the car is old, as you can tell. That's from the, as we are, speaking about myself, you know, it's from the 80s, and you keep it around, and you can, you know, you live on a small footprint, and you reuse and you repurpose and you engage with the environment. And that's why it's the metaphor to go back to where we had stopped last time. And this is this project, because I see at the top left, you know, some features that, and it's a low-tech approach, right? That pop-up roof is a simple fabric, and there's zippers that you open. So it's very low-tech. And this is what the shift movement that we're going to do with the students is going back to the simple things, the essential things, the low-tech things. And that's where you kick back in, Pedro, as you had given us a tour of this building here. Many of these building systems are very sophisticated, but not that complicated, or at least not that technologically relying on high-tech and more low-tech systems. Is that fair to say, Pedro?
Yes. Well, I'm not 100% sure what building you're talking about, because we don't see. Ah, yeah, that one. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thanks for the context. Yeah, I was guessing you were talking about that one. Yes, the systems. Some of the systems are relatively simple, in spite of using high technology, but it's a system that, in a worst case scenario, I think most of these systems could be um, operated manually if
Yeah.
the mechanisms broke down. So it wouldn't be like I don't know if I mentioned this famous case of the Jean Nouvel building in Paris. You know, the world the Institute of the Arab World, that
Monde
had
Arabe,
these
yeah.
beautiful elements that were supposed to automatically adjust to provide the exact amount of light and sunlight required inside the building. And they stopped working like within 1 year or two, half of them. They tried to repair them at one point, etc. And in the end, somebody goes there and opens them and closes them manually. And I'm guessing they do this a couple of times a year, maybe at the most. So this super high tech of things that, and in this case, there are a few elements that have this mechanical and automatic system, like this, for example, no, the this kind of tent element on the courtyard. And then there's an element on the rooftop that opens to allow the hot air to go out in summer, and then it closes. Well, it's not exactly. It's in general ways of speaking, we would say summer and winter. But on any hot or cold day, on hot days it opens, and on cold days it closes. So it will keep the warmth in the building.
Absolutely. So it's a lot like the T3 bus. It's very simple technology, built to last, built to be replaced. I was yesterday at my University of Hawaii Federal Credit Union Bank with my dear banker, Lindy, who's my hero, because we pay her too little. She makes not enough to be safe from social housing. She used to live in her car for 2 years with her daughter. She's a single mother of 3. She's a breast cancer survivor. So in many ways, she's my hero. Currently, she's like too many afraid of that Trump will cut her social security and she has to work forever. And she already works 6 days a week, right? So, you know, Lindy is just amazing how she keeps up her spirit. So in that building on King Street and close to McCully, the main branch, it's an 80s Pomo piece of cake that's totally hermetic. And I'm sitting there in the waiting room, and I hear that big AC machine going on and off and kicking in like a dragon breathing. If that thing fails, that's what you're saying, right? You basically can't live in that building anymore. It's the same, and I'm very guilty because I teach at the School of Architecture. Our School of Architecture is a similar Pomo piece of cake that Francis Oda, the principal of one of the largest architectural firms, had. There's a show about it. Had basically forced the architect John Hara to make it as bad as it is. And I've been there some weekends ago to put out some flyers on the desk of the students, and I was dripping. because it's unbearably hot. So we do this to our students. We provide them with space for their horrendous tuition and fees that they can't work in there. And this is absolutely absurd, right? From an economical point of view and from an ecological point of view. And that's, Jay, why we have to keep looking at these things and saying, if this is working in Barcelona, why isn't it working?
Well, I'm looking, Martin. I'm looking at what you're showing. And I certainly agree that we've got to de-automate these systems. You know, you have spoken in previous shows about the Ala Moana building, where there's a restaurant, or there was a restaurant at the top, and it moved every hour, 360 degrees. And at some point, not too long after it was built, it broke. And the mechanism, you know, was expensive and couldn't be replaced. And so it's now static. And it's been static for as long as Pedro has been alive. It's been a long time. And so
that's a long time. I'm not
a long time. And so my concern is that the more sophisticated, you know, the automation is, the more likely it's going to break and be irreplaceable. But I want to add something else. You know, you've talked many times about Hawaii and how you should open up, and the School of Architecture is not a good example of that. There are some residences, though, that are really fully open, and they have ways to prevent the rain from coming in, but they allow the fresh air to come in. And this is a beautiful thing. And Hawaii has great opportunities. I don't think the architectural profession has taken advantage of all those opportunities, but it could. And so you don't have to have any automation at all. You don't have to have mechanical automation, electric automation, and you don't have to have a crank either. But on the crank, I wanted to ask both of you guys a question. Okay, so the guy comes around once or twice a year and he cranks it, and that's nice. But I'm looking at that gizmo and I'm saying, you know, that could also break, and it wouldn't be so easy to fix it. And you'd have to replace it, it'd be expensive. It suggests the possibility of rust and all. Can't we find a technology that doesn't require that either? I mean, you know, one part of architecture is technology, it's engineering for sure. Isn't there something out there that would adapt through the seasons? You know the thermos bottle? I'm always fascinated by thermos bottles. How does the thermos bottle know whether it's hot or cold? The thermos bottle knows. And can't the building know inherently, without moving parts, whether it's rainy or sunny or hot or cold? Can't we find materials and material technology that would avoid even the crank?
I'd say, Jay, you just qualified to be a shift ambassador. That was your inaugural application speech. Welcome to the club. And I always said you should have been, I always considered you my dean anyways, but you should now become associate dean to our new dean, Moselle, that I'm excited to come, because this is exactly the point. And you know, while your Barcelona, Pedro, is closer to us than Germany, because in some shows ago, we have been showing D-Bully. That's how Sergi calls it. You know, for Sergi, it's female. So D-Bully was at the Christmas break when I was back, was inside, and it was snowed outside. So you're a little better than that, because snow you don't have, at least almost not. But yes, Jay, we are the most perfect here. Whoever created the world, the universe, you know, must have serious, we said this before, but it's worth repeating, must have serious attention disorder, and could only get it right to human thermal comfort that you're talking about here, and then ran away into some other orbit and left it to all these minions to fix it under screwed up circumstances climatically. And this is getting a little better in dealing with that. And you're talking about somewhere in winter, Pedro, but not to an extreme. So absolutely, Jay, we could actually go, and this is when you're always concerned about these high rises that have just been poured. And it must have been that I put me here on the street where they built the only new building in Waikiki. I put myself here, and I have the cement trucks going by in a half an hour rhythm. Then once they pour concrete, they can't get it right. They jackhammer it away. So I got these I got these dump trucks. They all drive out west, right? Oahu, aggregate, whatever they're called. On the cement, on the concrete truck, it says Hawaiian cement. This is all ironic and cynical. There is no cement in Hawaii. So these are all the systems that our ancestors have brought. They're invasive, they're colonial. Let's just undo them. And what you just said, Jay, you could, and this is where we're going. You encouraged us to talk to Christine Camp. We're very close to it. Your good friend, George Kaysen is spearheading that and got us the appointment. And next week, we're going to meet with her. Her Modea project, that is the conversion of your Davis Pacific Center. It gets very personal to you, right? You get that, right, Jay? We're going to talk to her and saying, because she's not selling, and we say, this is the foot in the door, and I will refer to you as the shift ambassador to say we replace it with these simple systems as Hawaiians, right? We don't want to go, we're very, all these developers go and use Hawaiian language and stuff like that. But if you're going to be serious about it, it's like, okay, this is what Hawaiians have been doing, right? They've been actually building their initial indigenous shelter out of basically branches, so sticks, and then have been covering it with pili grass and thatching it. It was constructed in a way that the thatching was actually had to be periodically be replaced. It got blown away by storms, and they've been redoing it. So this is the way it used to be for the longest time, right? Thousands of years. And for the little more than 100 years, we've been screwing this up. And this is what Shift is saying. Return to the roots, bring it back, and make systems from scratch, from local materials. They don't need to last forever. You already got the building, right? The floor slabs, the stacked lanais, as Kurt calls it. They last forever. But the infill can also be customized by sweat equity, because we have not only an ecological problem, but also an economical problem of affordability. So we can be retrained, and we're actually taking the TIM students that I'm having as well, and we go to the AO Center at the Outrigger, which is a cultural practices center, and they're gonna teach them how to do things again with your hands and weaving, because weaving is the tradition, right? There was no metal here on the island. So all they had was rocks to carve things. But otherwise, the weaving, there would be no canoes, right? There would be no fishing without weaving. So weaving is actually the indigenous thing. So we should go back to weaving. And thank you, maybe in this case, yes, Jay, this isn't something to literally say, oh, we're gonna do this as well, because, it might rust here more than it does in Barcelona. So absolutely, go back to the most simple yet sophisticated practices of our ancestors, and also, of course, blend them with some, marvels of modernism that we have moved on. So there are certain things that we can improve the ancestral practices, but that should be the basis again. Absolutely. Thank you, Shift Ambassador Associate Dean Jay Fidell.
While we're on the subject, you had a slide of a courtyard with a brick wall, and the brick wall was historic. There it is on the right and on the left. And I raised this question before, but I wonder if you could explain to me the aesthetics. It would be so easy to restore that wall in a way that looks like the original. This does not. This looks like an aged wall, aged by hundreds of years. Can't we find a material that would bring out the original color? Can't we restore that to the real bricks? Can't we restore the color to the real bricks? Because as historically curious as it is, I see it as a negative in this courtyard.
Well, Pedro,
if I'm allowed, I would
because you're
like
the closest to it in many
point
ways.
out that it's something that, and I've visited that building many times, and frankly, the more I go, the more I like it. It's something you really get used to.
Why do you like it? Why do you like it, Pedro? Tell me your aesthetic analysis.
I'm not there's some. I'm not sure if there's if it's something strictly aesthetic, but it's the reason why they did it was, I did mention this was done on purpose. It's because it's a building that went through many stages of use and many different functions, and they felt that they wanted to show this. There's something that it's very characteristic in general of historic buildings, and it's something that you see a lot in Barcelona. It's like the different layers of history. So it's like, don't hide the typical approach. For example, if we go way back, Viollet-le-Duc, 19th century, what did he do when he wanted to restore a building? He said, I like Gothic architecture, so everything that's not Gothic, I'm going to get rid of it, and it's going to look like even better than it looked in the 13th or 14th century. No, it's going to look even more Gothic than it looked back then. So this is like a different approach. It's true that it's not such an important, doesn't have so much history, or is not so important from a historical point of view. But I think it's an interesting approach, to say all the periods and all the different activities that went on in this place left an imprint on the building in some way. And a lot of people that use the building nowadays, they remember maybe not all of these phases, because unless if you're 80, you remember the first stages of the building. But I think it's an interesting approach from a historical or theoretical point of view. And then the aesthetic is, I don't know, I'm always like a radical abstract art, and maybe it can look like some kind of abstract painting if you look at it from that point of view.
I have one thing to add to that. If I were defending
this particular piece of wall,
if I were defending your position, Pedro, I would say that when you look at this, when you're in that building and you see that wall, it's different. It's different than the modern parts of the building. And it's a statement. It talks to you. It speaks to you. It has a message. And if it weren't that way, it wouldn't have a message particularly, but this does have a message. And the message is, we have historical value here. We want you to pay attention to the history of the building. We want you to pay attention to, the larger sweep of what has happened on this site. And so I would say, if I were defending your position, I would add that to the list of positive characteristics.
Let me then add another angle, and some shift is going to the Venice Biennale in June, with what the Technical University of Munich, Thomas Auer's Institute, and us at UH are contributing along the lines of what we're talking about. And I remember that many years ago, Massimiliano Fuxas was the curator of there's always a curator for every year. So it was Fuxas, and his motto was aesthetics, what we're talking about, and then ethics. So in modernism, especially in postmodernism, we have been getting overly obsessed with aesthetics and fetishizing aesthetics, and on the expense of ethics in multiple ways. So let's go back to Die Bulli here by Sergi, because the reason why he gave it to us is because he can't afford to, he's married to a Bavarian lady, as I am, but he also wants to be in Barcelona, where he's from, but he can't afford anymore. And that's your point, Pedro. Everything we're showing qualitatively is great, but you've been saying many times quantitatively it's not enough. He's an example of that, but he tries, his way is to say, I buy a boat, I live on that boat. We talked about that as a potential solution here also on the island, as we're scratching our heads, and so we don't have any hair left anymore because we're scratching so much, Jay. So, that's his solution, and we help him out with his solution. So with the Die Bulli, it's, yesterday I met a lady here who has one this is in 91, the last year they made it. She has an 85, and it has little to no rust, and she shipped it here some 20 years ago, and she loves it, and she keeps driving it. So because in Germany, we got the snow, we got the salt, I got basically at the seams and everywhere, I got rust. So now the question is, what do we do? So we need to stop it rusting, because otherwise it rusts away, right? So now the question is, with our dear, mechanical family fishers, thank you, who are, keeping it for us. And we just had a little incontinence the other time, and you can fix it, right? As you should do with buildings, Jay. I mean, I agree with you. The low-tech approach should be what the mid-century modern masters did for most of the time. For example, that metal grating that we saw on the on here, I threw in a show quote from a project of us, a school cafeteria that we did with the same metal grating that shades and is static. It doesn't need to be operated. But there's buildings like King Center, Jay, by Takashi Anbi on King Street that has this gold gone on it. We did a show with DeSoto a long time ago, golden grills and gones, that many buildings who throw that, throw that perforated shading coat on, and that is just all it takes. You still get light through enough to see and to work, but you're constantly like under a tree, which has the same principle, right? Of there's these, openings between the leaves, and that's basically does it. So there is systems, but, in defense of your building, because, that's the building of love, because you and your wife, you fell in love in that building at the ground floor. So we got to keep loving the building, not just for that. And I'm saying, yes, it was an overly optimistic, high-tech approach and shouldn't have been becoming the standard. But again, having to grease these louvers and having to, keep the La Ronde restaurant going would have been possible. If there's a will, there's a way, right? And that gets us back to the bully, which, because we want to keep it alive. So what are we doing now? And we have the same dilemma, Jay and Pedro, because what are you doing now? Are you going to go and basically what Jürgen Fischer was suggesting? He said, well, this might have to be a total repaint because there are so many spots. By the time I have them done all, grinded down and rust proofed and stuff like that, it might look like, acne and puberty. But while, and who tells us, pupitarians that acne is a bad thing? Well, it's all these industries who sell these things to us, right? So we look like clean, right? But that's all to be questioned, right? So we're currently arguing economically and ecologically and financially about, I wouldn't mind actually to treat every rust spot individually and paint it and patch it and show that as versus, okay, you got to repaint the whole thing, which is exactly what that wall is about, right? You basically, functionally, performatively, essentially, that's all it takes, right? And somehow then we have been spoiled and maybe corrupted through postmodernism and saying if things don't put makeup on, if things don't look fresh and clean and new all the time, it's not good. But what's behind that? And that makes us being a sociology show here at the very least, right? To think about what drives us. So we should, again, ancestral practices, they were way more about substance than surface. So maybe that's something to think about when we do kind of everything on the islands here. Let's move on literally.
Martin, I think it's a great idea to take the failed parts of the surface of the building and paint them individually rather than repaint the whole building. Yeah. But, I think there's a way to do it right and there's a way to do it wrong. If you paint the building and make it look like, the spots on the building, and you make it look like measles, that's got a sort of negative connotation. But if you paint them, say, with different colors, if you paint them and connect the dots in some way, if you paint them and be faithful to the inherent aesthetic of the failed spaces, and you bring the whole thing together as a kind of design, then it would look terrific. And you wouldn't have to paint the whole building, and you could make a statement as with the bricks. You can make a statement as we care about the history of this. We are sympathetic with the decline of the building. I'd be interested in Pedro's view of that. What about painting the spots in a way that's aesthetic?
I don't know. I was thinking of Hundertwasser when you mentioned this, like imagining these kind of patches of color on a building. Hundertwasser, I like his architecture. It's very particular, but it's a different approach, and it could be. I think it could be perfectly valid to do something like this.
in moving on, again, this is debatable, and that's a good thing, right? So we can basically say, but we can talk about tastes and likes, and we can talk forever, but human thermal comfort is less debatable, right? Because there's a certain tolerance where, you know, one of us three might sweat, you know, faster and earlier, and some like it more hot and some like it more cold, but it's all within a pretty narrow tolerance range, right, of just human nature. And that's why I'm saying, you know, things like this here, you know, is really to speak to and cater to. And so this is in the building, they recognize shade, and that's something that I believe should be built in building code here, that buildings are able and allowed and actually forced, required to shade themselves without the use of fossil fuel for sure. And so this is where, you know, maybe still too automated and still too mechanical. We could do it simpler. But what's interesting here, where you, Pedro, this is how you look from behind, by the way, because we've never seen you on the camera here. So, and so you walk us, and that theme, not by the same architects, because this is quite some, you know, a little walk away, but this is where you walked us along the guiding tour of Guiding Architects to the next project. You see here in public space, Jay, that you always believed in, and I know you will never give up, but in your low moments, you show your fear and desperation. And last time you said, Martin, you know, they're lost. And I recently, you know, was reading the same about that the crime in public spaces and people feel unsafe, unsecure. But let's keep believing that if we treat public spaces not just ornamental. One of our great emerging talents, Dalen, just said in this park that Howard Hughes is doing, part of that bridge, he said, there are these metal sculptures and they want to depict birds. And he said, why don't they create an environment that attracts real birds versus hot metal that birds can never put even birds can never put their feet on. And that's the dilemma of postmodernism, that we create these fetishized images that want to depict something that we have lost. While here, I'm saying you can, again, debate if it needs 3 posts and, you know, versus just 1 and the color of it. But walking under these shading panels is less debatable because we all, some little more, some little less, will feel good. And that was an overcast day there, and of course not needed that much, right? But that is public space, Jay, in a performative way, catered to human thermal comfort that we don't have in Honolulu, right? We don't recognize shade as an absolute essential necessity in the tropics, where it's hot all the time. Winter and summers in the sun, it is too hot, and on top of that, us pale howlies get skin cancer. So there's a real, you know, essential, existential need for shade. Fair to say?
Well, this photograph, Martin, shows you a linear public space. You know, when we think of public spaces, what was it called? Angora, back when?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, in classical times, it was always a large square. And indeed, in Europe, this, you know, public spaces are often large squares. But you can have a public space that's linear, just like this. And let me add, by the way, there was an article in the paper this week about the guy who designed the skyline in Manhattan, you know, which follows the route of an old elevated railroad track, which was so popular among everyone. And it was linear. At no point was it wider than maybe 30, 40 feet, the widest. And it had benches and greenery and view spots. It was really beautiful. It is really beautiful. And you know, there was a commentary on this one. I guess he was an architect who designed it in the first place. And there ought to be more of that.
This,
Absolutely.
It's funny you mentioned this, because this is exactly the same principle. Because instead of having an elevated railway that is you're transforming the area where the train used to go. What they did here is create like a kind of a bridge on top of the railway. So the train is going right under this pedestrian area. That's why it's linear.
Right on. Jay, you know your stuff.
Well,
So
let me
this
say
is,
that in New York City, Park Avenue has a green space for several blocks. And that is the space over the railroad. The railroad enters Manhattan, it goes under Park Avenue, and then it goes to Grand Central Terminal, which is on 42nd Street. And I always found it interesting that they reserved the green space to cover the railroad, but they never did anything with the green space. It should be a fabulous park. It is not public. It is just a traffic a traffic item is all it is. So I think if you're going to cover a railroad, you need to do something with the surface.
yeah. And speaking preserving, which is really the big thing in these days, we should not. You can build on top of things without tearing down what's below. So this is another great example in this sense, Pedro. This is where you walked us next to explain to us what we're looking at and what we read here, because we can't read it because it's not our language.
This okay, it's kind of a game of words, so it's complicated because the place is called this is an old factory that was recycled and turned into it was done by several cooperatives that were working together to develop this project, and one of them being a cooperative of architects who was in charge of the design. But they coordinated with the others because they already had like partners, and they were going to occupy different spaces within this old factory. And the factory is known as La Comunal. That's the name of the. Now it's kind of like almost like a civic center in some ways. Not exactly, but it does have like completely public spaces within the complex. And it's called La Comunal. And something that is descomunal, they added the des in front of it. Descomunal, it means like huge, or it could be like spectacular also. And this is the name of the bar slash restaurant slash nightclub they have in that complex that works. It's one of the cooperatives that works there is the one that handles, that takes care of this space.
So, and historic is always relative to, Jay. I mean, we had, in Kaka'ako, there were, historic buildings. I mean, there were buildings there, so that makes it historic. And we wiped them all out and we replaced them with insufficient capital concentration high rises. And then Kali might be the next one. And these are places that have character, they have a common legacy, and to keep things is just the thing. We can't afford to throw away things. Might it be straws, even though some governments say, I'll bring back plastic straws, No, we can't throw things away, nothing. We have to repurpose, recycle, upcycle in whatever ways. So this is you showing us around here. And talk a little bit about the sort of the interventions the architects did, which are, once again, they are performative in a multitudinal way, right, Pedro? Like this element.
So here, for example, it's the factory has like these independent sheds, and one of the things they did was you can't see it very well from here, but the facades are basically almost untouched. This element, no, this is like almost like a corridor space between the sheds, and it's used as a solar chimney element. You call it like that in English, right? Solar chimney.
Yeah. And we see it if I forward. We actually see it further down from here. That's it. You were looking for that, right? That's looking at it from inside out.
Yeah, and then you have, and this element is helping. No, it's one of the few elements that you see on the outside that is clearly an intervention. No, an element that's been modified, and it's done basically to help keep the temperature control and the humidity control inside the building. These,
Yep.
yeah,
Exactly.
and actually, it's funny because there's a detail here about a technical detail about this element is that the architects themselves, they recognized, they admitted that it wasn't working as well as they expected. But the reason why it's not working as well, it's not working badly. I mean, it still has an important role, but they were looking of ways of improving this, the energetic efficiency of these elements, and basically they. I mentioned to one of them, I'm not sure if it was in the visit where we were together or in another visit, I mentioned to the architects, maybe it's because the city council wouldn't allow you to do them higher. And he said, yeah, exactly. That's the main reason why they don't work as efficiently. So sometimes these regulations, no, they didn't want them to be higher because they thought it would alter too much the profile, the historical profile of the building. No, but if they would have been maybe 1 meter or 2 meters higher, they would have worked better. They would have been more efficient from an energetic point of view.
Yeah, this is one of the architects of this cooperative that you had as a guest speaker, and he was explaining the project. And again, it's a fascinating, just a whole different. Here the architect is just the slave of the developer, who has no voice and no rights. That's why I'm saying slave or a minion, right, of the capital concentration developer. While here, the architect is actually the developer, right? And he's all in it, as we say, right? Also economically and ecologically, and they actually live in there. So what they create is like, is a case study. It's a self-case study, right? It's a laboratory. But that's what it is, and that's why they have to make it work, because they're in it themselves, with everything, with their existence as far as what they do to make a living, right? And we walked very quickly also through. So this is their office. This is their office in the building. Again, they basically cleaned up everything and added, and it's a very, as you can tell, also it's a very open system, right? In all ways, that even shows as the configuration of the working spaces. And many of the projects that we have been showing you, and the few we will continue to show, they come out of this, literally and figuratively speaking, right? So if you're sitting in an exclusive high-rise, hermetically, which most of the architectural offices in our island here do, no wonder, right? No surprise why you design buildings that are just like alike, because you don't even know any better yourself, right? So that might be one of the secrets or recipes to better architecture. Might actually be better architects case studying themselves and their own environments, right?
Martin, that's a beautiful office space. That is so inviting. It is so conducive. It's not only the open space of it, but it's the way the furniture is set up, and it leads to a whole discussion of internal design and exactly. Furnishing of a space like this. But I love this space. I think this space would be so inviting to do work. Let me also add that this raises the question of loft. We have so many buildings and so many designs where the space is cut up. And if you go to New York or any of the large cities on the mainland, they will rent you loft space or sell you loft space, and you can do what you want with it. You can break it up with furniture and plant elements and so forth. And that's, I think, one of the reasons I like this so much, that it's open and it leaves it to the tenant or the owner to do whatever he or she wants.
Yeah, and just again, we see doors open, we see ceiling fans. There's one, vent there, but that's pretty much it. This is not air conditioned. All the materials have been, cleaned up and exposed and celebrated, and it's the perfect sort of framework for Pedro. We should explain a little bit more what actually that sort of abstract co-op means. It's actually a non-hierarchical system, right? There isn't like an owner of the firm who sits somewhere in a little separate, plushy, kind of royal, king office, and he's the boss and everyone is afraid of him, right? And these are all the little slaves and minions, right? These are all basically solely responsible and for themselves, right? Individuals that come together wherever necessary and desired. Is that a fair kind of characterization?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. It's the exact opposite of this the architect superstar, that we've been used to when we think of. I mean, don't get me wrong; some of them do great architecture. You can think of, I don't know, Zaha Hadid or Norman Foster or Frank Gehry or all these guys.
Well, and you just mentioned Jean Nouvel and his Institute
individual,
of
it's the superstar.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned the Institut du Monde Arabe, right? Which it leads. There's one design architect who has a brilliant idea, but then others need to execute it, and then it might fail. And then so what, right? While here, this is almost a guarantee, an inherent guarantee for it working better, and if not perfect. I mean, that's like they admit it. It's still work in progress. But I think this is very important as a recommendation, as a suggestion to the architectural community here on the island to rethink their practices fundamentally from within. And especially to the emerging, maybe the old ones don't want to change anymore, but to the young generation, right? How to form themselves, how to consolidate themselves, how to work together and not needing, that firm, that the few ones we have that hire them or not, right? So this is a pledge to the emerging generation.
They just get together and they create the society.
Exactly.
And it's also important, I think, the spirit of experimenting and looking and exploring things. I don't know if you remember when I mentioned to the architect that was with us. Is it true that you used cork as part of the mix on the outer walls of the building? And he said, yeah. And I was reading about the project, and I thought this was a very interesting element because it's not the only firm that has been trying to reincorporate cork, because it's a natural material instead of plastic and things like that, to help insulate the building. And he said, it worked kind of well, but we're trying something new now that we think it's going to work even better. I don't even remember what material it was, but the fact that even though they achieved what they considered acceptable results, they said, maybe we can improve it even further. And let's try something different on the next building and see how that works.
In fact, on the page on the picture on the right, he's referring to that exterior wall where he was talking about that. So it's really like a laboratory. They are exploring and they're testing, and they're not onto sort of a pretty picture based on sort of, again, outdated practices, but it's really on the search for improving in many ways. And so absolutely, I think we have to now. We're way past the show time, but it was exciting, so we leave it with that. And while me having scrolled through, this gives you again an idea about the many things. And just by the way, so this was one of the first projects that we got so excited about, and this is a result of that firm, right? That's by Local, right? And so that's the firm that we just saw. Lacol, and that's the firm that we just saw how they work, and they create these spaces that are alike, right? They have the same spirit, because that's a cooperative building, and it's designed by a cooperative architectural firm. So, wow, that is why, Jay, we need to stay on that, because it's just too good. So for a couple more shows, but we're gonna go back to other projects that these firms have designed, and so until then, stay excited. We're gonna take a little break in 2 weeks. We're all out and about, so we're gonna reconvene in about 4 weeks. So until then, keep the spirit up and stay cooperative. Bye-bye.
Bye.